Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today for another local search webinar with Rio SEO. We're excited to welcome our very good friends from NP Digital for today's discussion, Secure the SERPs, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Google Update. I'll take a minute or two to just go through a few housekeeping items while everyone is still joining, and then we'll go ahead and kick things off. So first of all, we like to always keep our webinars very conversational. We welcome your questions throughout. So if you want to go ahead and locate the Q&A button on your Zoom control panel toward the bottom of your screen, feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll try to answer as many as we can live. We'll save a few minutes at the end for some Q&A, but if we don't get to your question, we will be sure to follow up with you afterwards. So please feel free to keep those questions coming throughout the webinar. You can also follow today's conversation on Twitter. We'll be live tweeting throughout the webinar at Rio_SEO and using hashtag RioWebinar. Finally, we're going to send a link to the webinar recording within the next 24 hours. So please look out for a follow-up email from our team. And then without further ado, I'll just go ahead and give everyone a little bit of an introduction on what we'll be going through today. So recently, as I'm sure many folks are aware, we've seen Google make many prominent updates that have impacted both consumers and businesses. For consumers, Google continues to take more and more steps toward better understanding queries, and prioritizing better consumer and website experiences, both from an individual page perspective as well as an entire website and journey perspective. That's been evidenced by some of the recent core updates and also the page experience update. So for businesses, this can result in fluctuations in search rankings, which can often be a cause for concern and raise questions about how long this positive or negative impact is going to last. Today, we're going to discuss how businesses can stay in sync with future Google updates and how they can secure a top position on the SERP result pages to improve brand visibility. So first, let me introduce myself and today's speakers. My name is Justin Gianninoto. I'm the marketing director at Rio SEO, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. As I mentioned, I'm thrilled to be joined by several members of the NP Digital team today. We have with us Dave Shapiro, Vice President of Earned Media, Luke O'Leary, SEO Manager, and Scott Zimmerman, Senior SEO Strategist. So I'll start with you, Dave. If you want to just give us a little bit of a background on yourself and your role at NP Digital, and we can just go around the horn from there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Justin. So, hey, everybody, David Shapiro. I'm the Vice President of Earned Media here at NP Digital. So I oversee our SEO and content marketing digital PR teams. Been in the industry for about 15 years or so. Mostly focused on the SEO side, and looking forward to walking you through this presentation today.
Hey everyone, I'm Luke O'Leary, one of the SEO managers at NP Digital. I've had a lot of experience with the YMYL side of things, focusing on medical and financial. Been in the industry for quite some time, seen a lot of updates, and been very excited about many of them.
Thanks, Luke. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Zimmerman. I'm a senior SEO strategist at Neil Patel Digital, and I come from a demand generation and a technical background, focusing primarily in the B2B software industry as well as B2C e-commerce.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate that. And again, really excited to have you all with us today. So without further ado, Dave, I'll pass it over to you and we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, so we'll just dive right in. It was a hot summer, folks, I'm sure, as you all know, not only from a temperature perspective, but from a Google volatility and frequency of update perspective as well. Starting in June, we had 2 core updates, we had 2 spam updates, we had a page experience update. Going back even to April, right? Just a lot of updates, over the past 3 months, which is why we're here, and what we're going to be talking about today. But the reality is, it's just a continuation of really what we've seen for a long time, right? I mean, going back to the beginning of 2020, right? In February, you had a new homepage design. You had, again, images and search results. People also ask on the right side, Google testing new product carousels, related searches. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, right? I mean, the only thing that's really consistent in life is death, taxes, and Google updates, right? I mean, you look at, 2020, there was 4,500 Google updates in that year, right? That's about 12 a day. In 2017, there was 1,653, right? So it's an increase of about, really 3x, and it's only going to get faster. They're continually adjusting the way that the search results look. They're adjusting the way they rank websites, and they're adjusting, ultimately who shows up in those search results to continue to drive more value for their users, right? And it seems like every single update, no matter what, you have the SEO community up in arms and freaking out about, the most recent update that's taken place, how it's impacted their website, how long they're going to be down, if they're down, and then ultimately, what they should be doing as a result of it. But, with each of these updates, I think you really have to ask yourself, is it you or is it them? Right? I mean, Google, they've made mistakes in the past. They'll continue to make mistakes. And, one of the most visible early high-profile updates was for a little bit in 2005 when someone did a search for United Airlines. Continental.com showed up, right? Which is, for brands, just kind of a death wish, right? If you don't rank #1 for your own brand, you essentially don't exist. And I feel horrible for whatever agency was working with, United Airlines at that time, or whatever in-house SEO person that was working for United at that time, because really, like, Google just screwed up the synonym matching in the back end, right? They actually ended up matching United or Continental with airlines or air or airline. So it was really just them that made a mistake. Like, there was no, nothing technically wrong with the site, no backlinking issues. Google just had an issue with their synonym matching, which caused, one of the biggest brands at the time to no longer show up. And this is, something that obviously happened in 2005, but continues.
Yeah, and even today, the same trends continue where Google also has issues. And while most webmasters don't have $1 billion to correct those, there are often cases where, just dating back to August of 2020, where we saw URLs starting to drop in and out completely of the index for no explicable reason. So we began to notice this prior to it happening by a few days, and actually reached out to Google to get a sense of, is this us or is this a bug that's going on? Where shortly after, when we chose not to act because it simply looked incorrect, Google released this statement. And this continues today. So not just in August, we can continue to build on these examples as things that we haven't really had a chance to see how they play out in these different industries. And while they're very unfortunate when it happens, the large majority of these changes are not actionable by the webmaster. And it's important to get a sense of, is it you or is it them? And most often not, then it boils down to common sense of, this seems as though something is incorrect in the way Google's filtering the results. And again, to that point, this is even just recently, over the past 3 months since June, looking at an e-commerce keyword for a keto gift basket, for example. The positioning there in that graph shows moving out of the top 3 to completely off the front page of Google, which, as we know, you could bury anything on page 2. We chose in this case not to act on that category URL that was otherwise performing completely fine. We ultimately felt that Google would correct this result set. And following the volatility, that's exactly what we saw in this case.
And so, we see a ton of volatility. We see, URLs coming in the index, dropping out, just a lot happening. And the present may seem unpredictable, right? I mean, there's so many updates, there's so many changes happening. But, if you know where to look and know where to read and follow, like, what Google actually says and the statements that they put out, the future in a lot of ways has been foretold. And if you think about where they're going, 2021 and 2022 and beyond is really a continuation of a lot of the initiatives that they put forth in 2018 as part of their 20th anniversary. And it's just a continuation of those, right? So, they talked about 3 core shifts, right? And we're going to look at each of those bullet points. So, the shift from answers to journeys, right? So no longer just looking at an individual answer or a query, but trying to look at all the individual queries that people might do on their journey. And Scott's going to be taking a ton of time to talk about that in a little bit. There's a shift from queries to providing a queryless way to get information, right? So trying to figure out what information people might be interested in before they need to know to look for it, right? Because one of the biggest advantages that, or I'd say disadvantages that Google has and search companies have, is that people need to, have an idea, or they have to have a thought that's sparked from somewhere else to know they need to search, right? And so what Google started to try to do is figure out what people actually want, and then give them that content through, through different means that we'll talk about in a little bit. And then, that third bullet point, a shift from text to a much more visual way of finding information, right? I mean, Google realized that people love seeing images in search results. They love seeing videos. People learn by seeing things. And so, the more visual information they put in the SERPs, the more, the higher quality that they are in the eyes of users. And so underpinning all of these advancements in AI all these advancements has really been, artificial intelligence, right? So a lot of these updates and initiatives that they've been able to make have been based on their ability to understand what users actually want, and then, ultimately what types of results satisfy them. And so, the idea from going from query to queryless has really manifested itself in Google Discover, right? I mean, Google continues to push this product, and it's essentially become the homepage of the Google app, right, on mobile. Like if you open up the Google app or you go to google.com from your mobile device, they're going to give you content that they think that you want, right? They know that I'm from Chicago and I love Michael Jordan, and so any article that's about Jordan and specifically how he's better than LeBron James, which he is, I will definitely click on. They know I love rap music, big Drake fan, big Eminem fan. So any article that they can find about either of those dudes, they're going to put that in front of me. I'm going to click on it, right? They know based on my history, based on my personality, what I like, that is content that I would engage with. And, that has become a decent traffic driver for lots of sites as well. And then there's this shift from text to visual. And this is something that we did for one of our clients where, they had a piece of content that was really text-based, it had an image at the top, but, we tested a video on it. And so when we added the video, it should be no surprise, the average session duration went up, the pages per session went up. And so overall, the engagement went up for that piece of content. And then that corresponded with an increase in visibility, an increase in traffic, and then ultimately an increase in outcomes. And so, so much of these advancements, right, and so much of what they're able to do now is based on their understanding of language, right? Whether it's MUM or Lambda or BERT or GPT-3, there's just so many updates that Google has, or there's so many ways that they're getting better at understanding language and understanding what people are actually trying to accomplish when they do these searches, right? And Google's come out and essentially said that, with these advancements, they're better able to understand topics, right? And what subtopics actually comprise a topic, and then how they should layer those different subtopics into a given search result to show, a comprehensive overview of, essentially what they think users want around that topic, right? And so the example they use is home exercise equipment. And so based on their continuing improvement and evolution of their ability to understand what people want, right? For a query like home exercise equipment, they know some people want affordable exercise equipment. Some people want small space equipment, in 2020, I'm sure, in future years, it'll be 2021, 2022, et cetera. So, they're able to provide lots of different types of content in search results based on what they know people want, right? I mean, query deserves freshness was a big thing a while ago. I think that there had been some talk recently about a concept called query deserves diversity, right? And the more likely that they are to understand what subtopics people are interested around a broader topic, the more likely they are to be able to show that diverse set of search results. And then they're also better understanding passages, right? So, passage-based indexing was a huge thing, about a year ago or so. And, again, they're able to understand, what, not only just like a set of words, but, what kind of passage they comprise. And then more importantly, like what the actual answer is, right? So the example they gave here, for kind of a long tail query, how can I determine if my house windows are UV glass? Not only do they know, what the goal and what the intent of the query is, they actually know the answer, right? Like, so they know what types of URLs actually contain the answer. And because of that, they're able to surface those a lot better in search results and then reward those sites that actually have the answer over sites that, just previously might have had a lot of keywords that actually match it. So, they're combining their improvements in understanding of language with the continued focus on user experience, right? And that was a big focus of the page experience update was, helping understand, what websites actually provide a good user experience. They use the core web vitals is kind of a way for webmasters to understand how well their site was providing a good user experience, at least from a technical perspective. So was it loading quickly? Were things shifting when the page loaded? Things like that. And so they were really able to understand, how well a website was able to provide a good experience to users. What was interesting, and this was a study that Screaming Frog did on the right, is that, so many of the top ranking, second and third ranking sites actually didn't pass the core web vitals, right? And that was a little while ago. And more recently, as the page experience update is rolled out and a lot of the core algorithm updates have rolled out, they've definitely kind of refined this, and you see a lot of the top ranking URLs actually do meet the core web vitals. But these are becoming increasingly important, and so having a good user experience and a fast loading site, definitely is continuing to be important long term. And there's also been an expansion of how they use the expertise, authority, and trust signals, right? So EAT is not a new concept, been around for a while. But what is, not necessarily new, but I would say new-ish, is that they're using EAT, from what we've seen, in a lot more industries than just the YMYL categories, right? So initially it was, YMYL, you essentially had to have EAT signals in order to be successful. Now they're incorporating, from what we can see, EAT signals in lots of other industries that were traditionally not probably considered YMYL. And to be clear, they're probably still not, but they're looking and leaning into more authority-based signals for those as well. And so there's just so much changing in the landscape, and there's just a lot of activity, a lot of modifications with how they rank websites. And really, the million-dollar question is, how do we set our sites up to be successful for future updates, and ultimately learn to love upcoming algorithm updates and not be scared of them? And so to begin to answer that question, I'll pass it over to Scott.
Thanks, David. So what we call shift the paradigm here of panicking when an update is potentially coming, and instead look forward to them. I tweeted this out actually, and it's probably a famous last words for an SEO, but when you've been doing things honestly and when you've been following the protocols, you typically just reap the rewards. And what do I mean by if you've been keeping it honest? It starts with a clear conscience, really, about your SEO decision making and the goals. And what exactly do I mean by that? It's really taking a hard look at your site and asking, am I making these changes for the right reasons? And am I the best result on the web for this search? Now, we don't ask those questions because we've seen Google recommend them or have heard it in a webmaster office hours. We ask those questions because we're very serious about getting to that point. And unless we do actually benchmark ourselves against that goal, we probably would have a harder time actually achieving it. So a couple of the ways that we can do this in order to change that paradigm really is understanding your audience's touch points, but on a deeper level. So being honest with your users and where they go to find information, and being honest about your presence in the space as a site. I see oftentimes examples where Google will outrank another website for an SEO related phrase. And one might ask themselves, well, that's not very fair. But in reality, if you truly asked yourself, am I the best result for this query? I think you would probably want to actually read the Google documentation, right? In some cases. So we've got to understand those touch points. We have to understand how the local strategy is now influencing the other channels too, because what we've seen recently, as recently as Saturday, is a lot of different e-commerce queries beginning to localize on the desktop results, at least for me. And that seems to be emulating more parity across the mobile results than we've seen before. It is our hunch that this is going to continue to expand, and that a lot of these features on mobile will ultimately integrate into the desktop UI. And then the final point here about enhancing your content intentionally. So I think SEOs know deep down whether they're doing something for the user or if they're doing it to increase rankings. And if it's evident to you in your decision making, chances are Google will be able to figure that out, if not now, but in some time soon. So the less we're emphasizing making changes because we see Google say something, or that we get an idea that we think will make the content improve, you have to take a step back and really understand what is the role of everything together, and how are people understanding that visibility across different mediums. So the journey to your audience, or the journey for your audience, is unique to that individual person or persona. Oftentimes we think of variations of a buying cycle like a purchase funnel, but oftentimes they're asking the same question, and there's a lot of value in that question, but we've come to realize that there's a lot of other importance in asking, how do consumers decide what they want to buy, and who do they want to buy it from? So in this case, with so much choice available in the middle, a brand that's going to deliver a poor experience on the end of that purchase is going to have a lot of more trouble keeping the user in that figure eight of exploration and evaluation that does differ from person to person, and it differs across medium in which that person consumes content. So a lot of webmasters like to view their website as, the center of the universe, but in reality, there's a lot more that goes into that decision-making process from the onset of a query. And as we click through here, what we'll see is if something starts with a Google query, that is simply a means of one entity for visibility. Where if I start with living room furniture ideas, I have somewhat of a concept of what I'm looking for, but I may need to augment that search with additional, let's say, augmented reality from Pinterest or Instagram that lets you view furniture in your home, different mood boards on Pinterest, and inspiration from Instagram from living room furniture. After that decision is really evaluated from the research standpoint and the discovery, then a style is really determined, right? And that's when we start to see other websites and other factors integrate into that funnel, where a last mile delivery or an online delivery needs to be completed within an area that's within proximity to you and that can actually be fulfilled. And Google has to understand a lot of different aspects about your offering there. Beyond just your website, the way it's referenced across Yelp, the way it's presented in the maps listings, whether it's open or closed, these are all the collective sum total of parts here. So placing 100% emphasis on the content of your site is great to get the foundation in place. But once the foundation's in place, that does not mean there's a competitive advantage. That means we're at stage one of ultimately growing on top of that. And to be successful, we really have to look where the audience is. So beyond just looking for the volume and what they're searching, we want to get an idea of what motivates them. And some might be asking, how does this tie directly back to SEO? But discovering what podcasts your users listen to, whether it's Joe Rogan or a science-based channel, is really going to help you see where do I need to show up and how do I need to maybe pitch media accordingly for my content on the publications that they read. So tools like SparkToro that provide audience insights into where that active community exists are what help us drive some of the purchase decisions and information that we use in our content. And in order to do that, you really have to take advantage of all of the different mediums that are available. So these are the indirect signals, right, that we like to talk about that, while Google doesn't say they're a ranking factor, you can look at it from a common sense perspective as if my audience saw me in this place, would that build credibility for me? And, Google uses examples of if you sell cat food and you're linking to an auto dealership, there's not much relevance there, right? So showing your brand on a website that's not as relevant can potentially have a negative impact on that perception. So we want to target our media efforts, our sponsored posts, our link building, and even some of the acquisition of the interviews and influencer activation, all pointing in these different areas and mediums that the user is going to evaluate outside of the website to hook them back in. And that figure 8 funnel that we alluded to in a previous slide really gets at how to keep them within that purchase and evaluation decision of your ecosystem versus having them leave because of a bad experience to a competitor. One of the biggest things available, I think, that we should pay attention to is the amount of information and the features that are shown in a mobile results set versus desktop. And again, alluding to that parity that we expect in certain industries to begin to occur on that desktop result. But for example, Google launched free shopping ads using your product feed on the left that can show organically and give you an extra boost of traffic. Google My Business on the right-hand side gives you an opportunity to engage with a seasonal or a timely post. And we know that these things have been around for a while in the recommendations, but back to the original point of doing it intentionally. You have to ask yourself, does this content actually add value to my users, and why would someone actually want to read it? And there are several platforms, right, where Google takes a look at prominence, relevance, and proximity from a local level to get a sense of how to show that website for a given search. And the way I'm looking at this in terms of a common action item that I see in the SERPs is a lot of businesses were temporarily closed during COVID. And for the locations that manage, let's say 30, 40 franchises, the branded searches are still returning temporarily closed for that location in the actual search results in the local pack. So having a post potentially about the fact that you're reopening at X date and that we have this available for you now can take precedence over that temporarily closed marker in the map results, as you saw on the last slide.
It's great. One of the things that Scott's saying as well, though, is now content is no longer a choice. It's a necessity. It's a necessity for your brand to be found. It's a necessity to get your voice inside the race. And this is really important because at every stage of technologically advancements is that there's a lot more content in the world. The internet proved that there's so much content out there. Everyone tells you just to create content. When everyone's creating content, there's a new amount of content being pushed out, too much content. And when AI writing becomes more mainstream, when we talk about GPT-3 and how people couldn't really decipher between if a human wrote it or an AI bot wrote it, and Google took the stance of it doesn't matter who wrote it, as long as it gives information to the user, we will reward it. That means there's a new saturation. And when Ahrefs did this study and they looked at holistic search, they found that most pages of the web don't even get organic traffic, that most pages, they just sit there and they have no engagement. So how do you cut through that? How do you cut through the noise? Part of that is increasing your content's information gain. And Bill Slosky did a piece with Market Muse when they talked about the patents from Google specifically about information gain scores, which is how much more information does one article bring when a user has read another article in the topic or in the space. This means it's very important. When Scott was talking about objectively looking at our content to see is the best, are you just rephrasing what other people are saying, or are you bringing new insights and new data to this space, to this topic that a user can actually look at and gain something new? Because Google is doing the same thing, is looking at the content, seeing what new things are you bringing to the space so that I can put you above your competition because they're just regurgitating what everyone else is saying. And so this is important because a lot of massive sites on the web have done this and seen a lot of success. Some of my favorite websites, some of them built very well. Glassdoor specifically does this really well with their own proprietary data. Now, all you webmasters on this call have some type of proprietary data, whether it's the data that you find with users interacting with your website, with your products or services, or the stuff that you know goes on in the space in which you can report on. This is what Glassdoor does with their data, the things that they find with the interactions between their users and their brand, making articles that specifically appeal to their users with data points. And this is important as well because many clients talk to me and say, how do I get more backlinks? Backlinks are so important, the references, citations around the web. This is one of the perfect ways to do so, is creating articles that show proprietary data. Other people around the web will always want to reference the site because it's so much easier when they want to see more authoritative and an expert in the space to reference another expert in the space that has shown the data, that's shown the source. Create surveys, look at your web, look at the way your products are being interacted with. And this is also important to supplement with not just data, with the information that goes beside the data is the imagery, right? And so visual elements are so important to consider when you think that 65% of people are visual learners. 90% of information that comes to the brain is visual. And presentation with visual aids are 43% more persuasive is the reason that while we created this presentation and many of you created presentations internally include imagery so that you can stay engaged with it. Because if I had a lot of pages that were just text on slides, you'd be bored, you'd be unengaged. So why do you expect your users to be any different when they're interacting with your website? Make sure you have imagery that can help them compartmentalize the information that you're giving them. And all these sources, including the visual, is something that Neil does. I took this from Neil's blog. In my conversations with Neil, it's something that he's very big on, is that all blogs and articles that you see on his site will have imagery, will have either video or image content to help supplement the information that he's giving, to break the content for the user so it's easily to digest, but also it makes it more shareable and increases the chance of virality. And this is also important when we think about what content do we need to create. And we have a bias towards evergreen content because we want your brand to be successful year round. No matter what time of year it is, no matter what cyclical approach is going on, make sure that your brand is answering the questions that users are constantly coming in at different parts of their touch points. But it's not just that way to build authority. Temporal content has its purpose and it still belongs in the calendar. You need to have a voice when certain events are happening. This is really important. If your product or your service is the information around it, have a more cyclical approach to have bigger periods of time where they're more important for either evaluation processes or parts where they're going to more likely to convert. So really important if you're involved in e-commerce, Black Friday is something you should be involved in. You should have content that approaches this or events that are occurring in your space that are more specific to you topically. And so when we think about creating new content. It isn't just making the content. First, what we always tell our clients and partners to consider is the outcome we want with that piece of content. What is its specific purpose? Is it more for users on the exploration phase or the evaluation phase? How are we going to distribute? Which channels are going to be the most successful for this piece of content for users to interact with? And what sector of our audience are going to be most likely to engage with this piece? So what we're saying is figure out the why, the where, and the who before you move on to figuring out the what, the how, and the when and the where will you amplify it. And one of the things we also talk about with our clients that we're very heavy on is even before you start creating new content, look at the content you already have on your website. Scott was talking about relevance and prominence that Google uses for ranking factors. And to figure out relevance for your site, Google needs to understand your site. And to get context from your site, it looks at the content which you've created. We do a process with a lot of our clients we call the 6 R's, where you can see on the slide every one of these different parts of the project start with an R, and they're kind of self-explanatory, but the big ones are, we looked at, do we need to redirect some of our content because the intent of these articles are overlapping, so they should really be a single article. Should we go back and refresh some of these pieces that we already have on our page? Should we make them stronger? Should we be updating them? Because spaces evolve, search evolves, user intent and demand changes. We need to make sure that our content pieces are staying in sync with these changes and they're evolving alongside our user base. Should we be repurposing some of our content? Should we be splitting out some longer form pieces into separate articles that are more specific onto intent, or combining separate articles to make a stronger piece? Also, what is the format in which this article can be increased upon? Should it be broken out and showed on social into Google Posts, onto your YouTube channel, or should you be using those same assets and integrating them into the article to make it more engaging? And also retire them. What pieces of articles do we have in our content body that are not relevant to what we're trying to talk about if we want to see this authority of the space? When we want to see relevant in the eyes of Google and our user base and our audience, make sure that we're talking about what matters to them and not the existential stuff that doesn't really matter, that they don't care about, that is muddying the entity in which we are created. And so we talk a lot about creating content, and most users around the web will tell you create content. Content is king. But they don't tell you exactly how to do that. With every piece of content, you need to have a specific purpose, building upon your core topics, around your core competencies, making sure that you're answering the questions directly related, and then expanding on those ideas. Then focusing on the supplementary ideas that exist in the space to make sure that users that are involved in different spaces understand what your purpose is. And then hitting this level of the edge of aboutness, or what we say is tangentially related content. Things that are still related to your space that involve a different touch points for the users that are still very important for their decision that might not be directly related to your product. This is very important for being able to understand and hit those different touch points we keep talking about, so that your brand is always visible to different users throughout their different touch points and their different journeys. Focusing on your product. What is it? What information can we specifically define around it? How does it work? Also, but what specific interactions does it have with specific users or other parts of the industry? Also, what niche information can we deliver users around this, keeping in the idea that we're constantly building upon our core competencies? And then what can we talk about that is in the world of? When we talk about loans, or we want to talk about financial institutions, we also talk about to users how they handle their finances, because while those are not directly related, they are indirectly related into the decisions that they're making. And this is really important because even through the edge of aboutness, these tangentially related topics, we're adding authority to the things that come before it. And we're making sure we're connecting each of these ideas in the articles that we're creating, but also the internal links we're making internal citations so that every piece of content we're making has a purpose, not only in the user's touch point in their journey, but also the purpose of bringing authority and internal reference and internal equity back to our core products and our core services to increase the chances and likelihood that Google will recommend those for a specific query. And so that's what we're talking about. This whole presentation is to help you get a strategy that is aligned with the direction Google is going, but working within the search parameters of today. Because today is unpredictable. We want to make sure that we satisfy what Google wants today. We want to make sure that our overall long-term strategy is set up for future success, making sure that we're focusing on making our content from an expert and become an authority in the space and gaining trust from both the users and the search engines. So we can be recommended around the web to gain backlinks, but also recommended as a result from a query given or answered into Google. And just to give you an example, one of the clients we recently were involved with when we did a QBR and a look back, when we looked at the left will be a chart from our position 1 through 3 and 4 through 10, which is page 1 keywords, as well as 11 through 15 is the keywords that are about to hit onto page 1. And the graph on the right is that the page one keyword holdings month over month, involving the month over change look back on each previous month, we can see that we had over 400% campaign to date growth in page one visibility, which is huge. It's great success. Just looking at the end of Q2 comparing to Q1, we had almost a 50% increase in page one holdings. And then when we go into July, our position 1, 2, 3 holdings, so the things that we are most relevant for, increased 61% over the end of Q1. And why I focus at the end of June and the end of July is specifically because these are these recent massive core algorithm updates we had. And these were very, very successful for our client and very successful for our strategy. And what you can see here is at the end of June, we saw a massive increase on page one holdings. And while the end of July doesn't look like a massive increase in page one holdings, what we saw was a massive increase in position 1 through 3 holdings. So the things that we were most relevant for, to seen as an actual authority in the space, to be given as a result, as you have a question, here's a result specifically that will answer that question that is the most relevant, that is the best answer. And one of the important things to point out in this graph to the left that shows our trajectory and our historical evaluation of position 1 through 3 keywords is that during March, there was a change with Google in that they started showing and displaying less featured snippets. And this was predominantly seen in this space, which is financial, but also on the search holistically, the search all around. And what it was is the same as Scott, is we looked at it and assessed our strategy. We realized we didn't need to change anything. We were on the right path, that this specific moment in time was unpredictable and it was volatile, but our strategy was sound. And we knew that when Google made future updates, that we would go back to a good position. And that's exactly what happened. Come the end of July, we held over 600 new position 1 through 3 keyword rankings, which was a 167% increase from the end of 2020. So to recap, what we're saying is that it tips to learn to love the Google update. And so you can start having tweets like Scott that are in anticipation to celebrate the next Google update that is announced from the Google and the webmasters on that side, is that you need to understand your audience's touch point and be really in sync with them, but also understand where your local search strategy is the most effective and where those touch points are needed compared to where your organic search strategy is the most efficient and best served. And utilize making sure that all your content is enhanced, but intentionally. That point that Scott said, make sure everything you do is done with intention, and make sure that you're integrating these with proprietary data to be a proper authority, to be referenced, but also visuals to keep your users engaged, because there's no reason that they'll stay engaged with just black text on white pages. And thank you for listening to everything we had to say today.
Thank you all so much. That was excellent. I think you did a really nice job laying out a really clear roadmap for implementing a semantic content strategy. And hopefully we can all get to the place, to Scott's tweet, that we're looking forward to Google updates, and hopefully we see some of your tweets in the future with some excitement around some future updates. So thank you all again. I want to definitely save a few minutes. We have some great questions, I think, that you guys can dive into a little bit deeper. One that came in while we were speaking, we spent a lot of time talking about the customer journey, about content, about contextual queries, and optimizing the entire sort of customer experience. Thinking about technical ranking factors, though, that's still a piece that I think a lot of SEOs worry about. So the question is specifically around AMPs, accelerated mobile pages. Do you guys have any recommendations around AMPs, how brands can leverage, or just in general, maybe to broaden the question a little bit more, how SEO should be thinking about how technical factors come into play with everything we talked about today?
That's a really great question, and it hits on a lot of the points related to the intention that Luke just alluded to. So the way that we like to look at accelerated mobile pages is from the user's point of view first. So is there an added value that we can calculate potentially based off of how much we're merchandising right now compared to where we want our speed to be? And Google actually has a calculator that allows you to input this data through their Think with Google tool. So for the user, there is a massive benefit to pages being faster. However, on the technical side, there is a lot of upkeep that comes with managing two effectively separate sites. So in the event where the easy decision is to install a plugin and spin up AMP URLs, the best effort at that point would be spent in making your site as fast as it possibly can be. So if you had to make a choice between using accelerated mobile pages to become Core Web Vital compliant in a sense, or making my own site fast, I would err on the side of my own site because AMP is no longer required as a format to enter the top stories carousel as of a few weeks ago. So that again gives the business that doesn't have the ability to create an AMP framework and maintain it to be successful in those formats as well, simply by hard work on the actual site.
Thank you so much. I think that was extremely detailed. I appreciate that. You know, we like to stay optimistic on this webinar and be positive about these Google updates, but there is the potential out there for some negative ranking factors coming into play as well, which we didn't touch on too much, but we did have a question come in around spam backlinks. And we talked about a strategy for developing positive backlinks, but in the case where a site may start receiving some negative or spam backlinks, do you have any recommendations for how brands can overcome that?
Absolutely. And I just actually confirmed this by asking John Mueller, and there's a famous tweet that he has that says you can get a spammy link from a good site and you can get a good link from a spammy site. So just by default, spammy links are very difficult to tell. And the one thing to keep in mind is if you've purchased a domain that looks as though it has ranking issues due to a previous penalty, that is one of the only cases where examining what sort of shady websites have been linking to it in the past, whether it's adult content or it was a link network, those are the instances where you'd want to take action to clean up your perception of that domain on Google's end. However, when it comes to just the natural practice of linking, or let's say a negative SEO attempt by a competitor to just point a bunch of garbage links at the site, you don't need to take any action on that. When Google updated its Penguin algorithm to evaluate links in real time versus demoting a website and now just not counting the link, there wasn't a need on webmasters' end to solve for that problem anymore, in my opinion. And whether you're a small business or you're a million-page website, Google is able to handle this the same.
Excellent. I think that addressed that question. A little shifting gears just a little bit. You know, we talked about those 6 R's that you guys highlighted in terms of, you know, ruthlessly curating existing assets, which I think is one piece of this question. But I think the question really is around, if you don't have any insights or data to go off of, and you'd like to implement a strategy like this, how can you kind of get started for a brand that may not have some of that historical data?
For sure, Luke, I'd love to kick this one over to you.
Definitely. So one of the things too is just send surveys to your audience. Right? A lot of big websites that didn't have the data they had to look through their GA or any other analytics platforms they had started surveying their audience, surveying their customers, figuring out how do they use their projects or services or products, or what do they need it for? What problems are they finding in their spaces that they need solutions for? And this internal data that they were doing to understand better how their product and services could supply their users, they started using into their content because they realized also their user base wanted to know this information, how other people are using services, how other people are using products to solve their problems. So take an extra step and make sure that you interact more with your audience and then gain those data points. So just taking that, you know, an extra engagement factor.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Scott, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, for common websites that are maybe smaller and just getting started, there's oftentimes a contact form or a plugin that's available for some type of form submission. And if you're able to create another field or two that can start to collect some custom information, like do you prefer this type of shipping or X? And then, you know, in a couple of weeks, when that aggregates data, you then get some points back where 50% of our customers are split down the middle on overnight versus 2-day. So you try and start to look at the means of how they're getting to the site. Even if it's not through organic search, there's a way to start collecting that data with some of the forms that come default on these websites.
Awesome. You know, I want to build on that a little bit, and just thinking about kind of this balance between evergreen and temporal content that you guys talked about. I think that can sometimes be a difficult balance for brands to strike, you know, where to put their efforts and budget. Can you guys speak to that at all, and kind of how you find that right balance? I'm sure it may differ by vertical or by, you know, specifically who you're working with or what kind of content you're working on, but any general tips for kind of striking the right balance there?
Yeah, most definitely. One of the big things is they both matter, right? You can't just silo into one because the success of one depends on the success of the other to gain relevance. That's why we kept talking about being relevant to your space. So the temporal really matters because those events are very relevant to your space. So you need to have some content around them. But for the temporal to exist, you need to have talked about evergreen things, the things that people are constantly talking about in space. So it isn't a division between the two. It's just choosing one. They're not mutually exclusive. You need to do both. And you need to balance between the two. And kind of the best thing I'd say to do is look at your content roadmap and plan it out as long in the future as you can. So you can start preparing things, because you can't make content a month or two in advance and think that you're going to rank really well, especially if you don't have the relevance or the authority already built behind those topics. So make sure you're doing it well beforehand and planning out for when these events are going to happen.
Now, something else that kind of came to mind, we talked a lot about some of the opportunities for brands to capitalize on some of this free real estate that's out there, right? I know you guys mentioned a few examples. Shopping ads, Google posts are two great areas. Is there anything that you see either coming in the future or any other areas that you think brands are maybe underutilizing today that they can claim some more of that free real estate?
I think certainly on the mobile results set, what we're seeing, at least in e-commerce at the moment, is that a set of recipes is appearing in the mobile results. That is another format and schema markup that can be enriched. So if you offer, even if it's a bowl to make the salad, like just making a recipe or something fun to test out that format. And to Luke's point, it's all necessary, right? So the Evergreen covers your bases as a year-round traffic generator, and the cadence that's laid out there then allows you to save some resources to cover the newsworthy things that ultimately show in top stories. And then if you layer in the recipe element as well, then you can potentially capture 4 spots if you're running a paid ad. So those features and those formats, I imagine, will continue to be more prominent, especially in the B2C industry right now. And I think the B2B software industry will be a little bit behind in terms of what we see there.
I know we also always talk about from a local perspective, and even just thinking about your GMB listing, there are so many opportunities within those listings that brands aren't completing their listing, filling out all the fields, adding photos. There are tons of areas there also for user generated content. I know from a local perspective, it's very similar. There are a lot of areas that brands can capitalize on that free real estate. One other piece here, I think, is the measurement. And this kind of came up in the question earlier around, if you don't have any historical data, how do you get started? But assuming, you are implementing a strategy like this, what are some of the metrics that you would recommend brands evaluate 30, 60, 90 days and even, further out, once obviously, it takes some time to start seeing results, but what are some of those metrics that you typically would recommend looking at?
I think I'll let Luke expound upon this, but one of the things that we try to almost religiously do is not base our projections and our plans on a finite third-party ranking data, right? For example, we want to actually go into Search Console. If we have the data, let's use our own proprietary rankings, because we can isolate it to our country, what is actually showing in the search results. So don't let, if you have your own data, don't let the third-party data distract you. Rely heavily on what Google is telling you, because quite honestly, it is our really only source of truth as to what's coming from the live results pages is in Search Console. So take inventory of those clicks and those impressions and what their average positions are across device types and in the locations, but use Search Console to do it so that you know it's actually true.
It's great. To expand on that a bit is also make sure that you have a primary goal, right? So you talked about having a goal or a KPI from the question. Make sure that you have one primary one, which holds above everything else, because as soon as you start mixing your goals up, your measurement becomes an absolute mess. And when you do that, make sure you're reevaluating what the actual projects you're doing and how they affect that primary KPI. Because when we talked about it, different pieces of content have different really outcomes. Are you focusing on the exploration phase or the assessment phase? Are you focused on visibility? Or is the whole point of this project to make sure you have more conversions coming in? Because those are two different KPIs that you're measuring. They may assist into each other, but one of them needs to be the focus. So when you were assessed on your 30, 60, 90-day time periods, you understand, are you making progress or are you not?
Excellent, excellent. And I know we're nearing the top of the hour relatively soon, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I have, one final question as we do so. This shift may be somewhat new to some brands in the way that they approach SEO strategy and content. Maybe we can just go around any final tips that you guys would have for a brand looking to get started in this shift more to semantic content and contextual queries, shifting kind of from answer focused to journey focused. Any last parting words of advice that you guys would share for brands who may be interested in implementing this?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I think is it's not new information either, right? So a lot of the things we were telling you isn't new. It's the way Google's moving them forward in the future. In 2012, when Google went towards entity-based indexing, they focused on things, not strings. So when you're doing your keyword research, when you're focusing on what your users are typing into Google queries and understanding what your user base is, understand what the intent behind those questions and queries that they're asking is. We're focusing on intent, not the string of characters that they're typing in. Too many businesses get stuck on those words that are showing up and not understanding the intent of the reason that users are actually typing in those queries into Google and getting to these pages.
And I think an important part of getting that foundation laid correctly is actually, this is going to sound weird, but don't listen to SEO in the beginning. Write everything about your product out, really elaborate and maybe print out a piece of paper of your competitor's landing page. And then when you're building it, if you can read to yourself and say, this is better than what that competitor is doing in an honest way, remember we talked about honesty here, then you can take some action there. But make sure you don't let SEO cloud the mind so much that you don't speak to the product and its features enough and you're worrying about keywords. The keywords can always be woven in later. It's about really getting your message out appropriately that matters above all.
Yeah, and just to add to that, just bias toward action. Right. We worked with a couple of clients that were just starting out and, they were looking at the KPIs. And, I think that one of the main ones that we ended up at was, well, how much new content can you get created over the next 365 days? And really, you can obviously go back and refine it later. And I know we talked about having specific KPIs, but when you are early on and you are trying to figure things out, just get it up, just get your content out there. Get people excited about your brand, searching for it. And the more of that you do, that gives you the elements that are necessary later to refine. But if you, to Scott's point, spend so much time focusing on, is this page going to rank for this keyword? Like you're kind of missing the forest for the trees or the trees for the forest. I forget which one is which, but you're doing it wrong, so you just gotta get out there. You gotta start generating activity, creating content, getting people talking about you. And if you do that, then again, you have all the ingredients to be successful long-term.
Excellent words of advice. I appreciate it. I think that's all the time that we've allotted for today. But if there are any questions outstanding that we didn't get to, we will make sure to follow up with you afterwards. And if you forgot to ask or have a follow-up question that pops up afterwards, feel free to shoot us a note over at marketing@rioseo.com. I'm happy to pass anything along to our wonderful panelists here as well. And if you guys wanted to share any contact information as well for how people can best reach you.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Find us on LinkedIn. I should know this by heart, but I also think it's like info@npdigital as well, if you have a general question. But yeah, definitely reach out to us on LinkedIn. I think that's probably best. More than happy to answer questions, have follow-up conversations, and figure out how we might be able to help.
Add Scott on Twitter. Follow Scott on Twitter.
You can follow me on Twitter just to see if that tweet really does end up biting me. Yeah, but we'll see a follow-up in the next month. It's at Scott J. Zimmerman.
We'll make sure to circle back with you on the next update for sure. Thank you all again so much, Dave, Luke, Scott. Really appreciate your time today. Had a lot of fun with you guys joining us, and that's it for today. So thank you everyone again for joining us. It was my pleasure to moderate today's discussion and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Take care, everyone.
Thank you guys so much.
Take care, everyone.